Roby Price, and welcome to my workshop.
Well, I'm just back from Chattanooga Sawmill. Got a boatload of white oak. I think it's going to be perfect for drawer boxes. They're mostly seconds, but I don't need it that thick. So I got milling machines. I'm going to take it down. So let's get on inside and get this project started.
Built-in cabinetry for the new room. Part 1. Drawers. First dimension.
Well, we're out of the truck, and I've got this saw stacked up on two little sawhorses that look like they're about to give out. This stuff is heavy. All right, so what have I got? You might think it's junk. It's not. It's not dimensioned, and I knew that ahead of time. But look at it. Let's get this down here. You might say there's nothing but knots here, but I don't want any planks that are wider than 4 inch. So take a look at this and you start navigating yourself around. There's a lot of 4-inch stuff here that is entirely clear, and we're going to start cutting this stuff up and get to that clear stock. This stuff was a bargain at twice the price, to be truthful with you. Now, what else have I got? I'm looking at this board right here. There's fleck. There's a lot of quarter sawn in that board. That is gold. So it's just like the secondaries when you buy maple. You know, you buy the junk maple that you use for drawer stock. This is going to be drawer stock too, except it's filing cabinet stuff. It's heavy duty. There's a lot of weight here. This isn't a kitchen cabinet or a comb drawer. This is designed to hold paper. I think there's going to be 5-6 reams in there. It's going to be heavy. So, but the quarter sawn is there, just like the maple. You buy a bunch of it, and somehow a bit of curl walks right into the batch. So that's what we have here. I've got some quarter sawn down there, and that's where we're going to take the whole stack to first dimension. And then we'll sticker it up. We'll start to pick and choose. The good stuff, we'll put on the shelf. The other stuff, it's still good stuff. It's just long. It's not quarter sawn. So let's get this stuff marked up and put it on the rack. We got to get first dimension. And I'm going to cut out the knots. I'm going to cut it into 4-inch strips, and we're going to go with it. The length is about 20 inches. That's all I need for maximum on these drawers. Last point. I didn't spend much on this, and I've alluded to that a couple of times. You can spend your money on toys, and I've spent my money on toys, or you can spend your money on wood. But if you buy dimension lumber from the mill, and you get it back to your place, and you start trying to join up boards and whatnot, you'll find out that, man, it's not as good as you think it is. We'll dial this down to exactly where I want it, and we'll get it there, and it will stay. But I wouldn't trust it coming from the mill. Spend your money on toys, get your bargains on wood, and have yourself a real time uncovering diamonds. Let's get after it. I'm tired of talking. I'm at the bandsaw, and as you can see, we've got an enormous amount of material to process. Very little of this ended up to be total defect, and I kind of expected that. So here we are at this point. We're going to start cutting this up into 4-inch strips, and in the process of doing that, other defects that I would call local defects, we'll remove those as well. There's a lot of wood in this plank that's useful. As a matter of fact, some of the planks that are just really ugly, there's still a lot of wood that's really useful. So we'll cut this into 4-inch strips and get ourselves ready for the next set of processes to take this down to first dimension. We've got all our boards cut to width, and I'm going to admit right up front, and you're going to see it on anyway, this wood was a little unruly and pushed itself around on the blade pretty good. So we're going to have to work hard to get a square edge on this side, but the first thing to do is get a flat face. And when we do that, we got to make sure we mark our board. Now this is unruly too, so we're going to take a fairly aggressive stance on the jointer. And we'll just start planing these things down one at a time, keeping in mind that we really want the bow to be this way on the jointers so that we do the ends first. That will allow us to get to flat so much faster.
This board's got a bow with a twist, so we're going to have to treat him a little different. We'll press down on alternating corners till we find the two that don't rock. When we find them, we know we got the two lowest points, so we've accommodated both the twist and the bow. With each pass, we remove a little bit more material, and the board becomes more stable on the jointer bed. Pretty soon, we've got a flat face with the least loss of material. If the joint is very flat, how do you know which side to joint first? The corner tap method just isn't working. I can't find a difference in either side. Well, there's another method, and that's the rotation method, and that will help you figure out where the bow is. The board will rotate more freely around the point of the bow, but it will not on the other side. Now that you've found the bow, mark him up, turn him over, and get ready to join him, because you know where the bow is at this point. Now, if you can't get this action, then you've got one or two things wrong. The board is perfectly flat on both sides, or you need to clean up your cast iron. Well, now that they're flat, we got to plane the other side, because the other side isn't, and that's going to take a little while. Just so you know, I marked all these faces. I'll know when they're flat, but I'll tell you now, there's a lot more material that needs to be removed to achieve first dimension than just getting them flat. We're going to be here for a while. If only time was measured in chips. Well, if it was, I think you'd know a little bit about how long we've been at this.
Well, we are playing to first dimension thickness, and you can tell just by the way it sounds and the fact that it's all stacking up very nicely. Now, I've got a stack over there that's got some quarter sawn fleck in it, and it is not as thin as this is. I'm at 3/4 over here. I'm a touch thicker over there, but that stock is going to go away for another day. This is what we're working on. I'm going to stack this up tonight so it can breathe. It's not going to look like this when we arrive in the next episode. By the way, we did end up with another drum of shavings. It's been a short episode for you, but a long day for me. So I'm going to cut this episode very short. This is not the format that I desired, but it's about all the gusto I've got left. It's 8 o'clock at night and I'm tired. So my wife's keeping supper warm and I'm going to go partake. I'll see you next time in Roby's workshop. Well, here they are, and there are a lot of them. And this is looking really good. Having looked at all this red oak, yes, red oak. I didn't see that till I looked at the video. And I must have had white oak on the brain. This is all red. It's what I knew it was, but I just didn't say it. But we are at first dimension, and all these boards are looking really good. There is some movement in some, and there's an illusion because the tops of these things aren't squared up or parallel, but for the most part, we're in good shape. So what are we going to do? Well, even though they're in good shape, we have to come down to second dimension, which is going to be another 1/8 of an inch. And at that point, we can start gluing up some panels. And we're also going to take these tops and parallel up the tops. But that has to be done regardless. So there is some movement in some of the boards. So everything's got to go back to the jointer and everything's got to go back to the planer, which is pretty much what last episode was supposed to be. Last episode was so short because there was only one series of activities, just like we're really getting ready to repeat. So that's why I'm tagging this one onto the back of the other. As far as gluing up panels, we may actually save that to the next episode. I'm not really sure. It kind of depends on how it all edits out. We are going to take these to a width. I think we've got a number of these that are going to end up at 3.5 inches. Others are 4.5. I don't think I've got any 5.5s here. But there you go. And that'll help us get set up for gluing up of panels. One thing I want to point out, this is beautiful crotch wood. And we've got a number of these. And I'm just looking at this thinking, if I could book match this, I would have a really, really stellar panel to a door or a top to a box. This is the type of thing that you can find when you order a bunch of seconds. You save a ton of money and you get some diamonds. So I encourage you to take a look at it from that standpoint, and don't always seek out the most expensive boards money can buy. Sometimes if you'll just take a larger quantity, you'll find those diamonds and you won't have to pay for them. So that being said, let me get set up, because this is going to be a little bit of a dance just like the last time. A lot of repetitive actions, and we'll show some of that, but for the most part I just need to get to work. So I'll see you on the other side of this.
Let me see if I can summarize the next couple hours of my day. It's a lot of joining and a lot of planing.
Well, we're off the planer, and these boards look great. 9/16. Couldn't be happier. Everything is square and straight, and things are looking extremely stable. This is turning out to be a really good product. I've got a very, very square flat surface here. This has yet to be ripped, so that's what we're doing next. Now, I will tell you that I had an issue on my jointer. One of the carbide teeth on the spiral head chipped, and I had to fix that before we started, and that went without a problem. Second, the spiral head on my planer also has a chipped tooth. The problem with that one is I have to take the planer apart to a significantly higher level. That's why you saw me planing only on one side of the cutting head. It's because I had a chipped tooth and didn't want to deal with the grooves that it was putting in the boards. So I've got very good surfaces as a result. Now you're probably asking the question, why didn't you go back to the Woodmaster, which is a bigger, beefier planer anyway, and with a brand new head? Well, I couldn't quite get the bed to come up to my satisfaction. It appeared to me something was binding. Whether it was or wasn't, I'm not exactly sure yet, but I had already jointed this surface, and this one had not been jointed. So I had fresh material on one side, old material on the other. I was under a bit of a deadline. I needed to get the other side to match. You want both sides of your board to match accordingly to help keep them stable. If you've got dissimilar moisture contents on either side, your boards will warp. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to borrow trouble there. So I went ahead and used my smaller planer, one side of it. And that gives you an explanation of what we were doing and why. Now, we're going to go through and get this stuff ripped, and I am not going to set my saw fence at a specific dimension. I'm going to get as much of this out as I possibly can. Being frugal is always something you have to do in a workshop. So a few more things to set up, and then we'll be ripping wood. We will take these and go to the joiner to get a flat, straight edge so that when we marry up panels, they're perfect glue joints. And the point there is, I don't care if they're a little bit out. For the most part, I think they'll be perfectly parallel, but the flat glue joint is more important than keeping things perfectly parallel. We're going to take these panels after they've been glued up, and we're going to cut them to size later anyway, so it's not going to matter. So again, let me get a few things set up. We'll start ripping and jointing.
Well, it's another dance, but it is the same tune. Just get yourself in a pattern, and you'll move through the boards one by one.
Well, we're all ripped, paralleled, and jointed. I think we're in good shape and ready to start gluing up some panels. But we've got to cut some of these to length. For instance, the front of the box and the back of the box are going to be 11 inches wide. And we're going to do 12 inches when we glue up our panel. We'll cut them to final length a little later. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut this side first and then come back and cut 12 inches off this stop. And we're going to cut all the front panels first. Now, the front panels are only going to be one board tall. And at the end of the day, it's probably going to be about 3 inches. The backs are going to be 12 inches. So we'll cut all the fronts first using this setup. We'll cut all the backs as well with the same setup, but then we're going to go immediately over and start gluing up panels. After that, we'll tackle the sides. They're a bit different. We'll talk about that in a moment. All right, here we go. Do a little glue up here. There's really nothing special about this. I've brought my template number 1 over here to show you how this works. And it's really very simple. All I'm going to do is take this board right here. I'm going to square up one end. I'm going to move him over to my stop, which is set to the correct length for this template, and I'm going to cut it to length. And it is about that simple. But there is one thing we will look at, and that is the width of this board. I need it to be at least this wide. So what I've done is I've taken a piece of tape right here and I've marked the top. Now, you'll notice that my template does come down 1/4 inch. And being frugal, I'm going to probably push this a little farther than I should. So I've made a mark right here 1/4 inch less. As long as I fall within that minimum range, I'm fine. So we're going to go ahead and cut these up. Now, we're going to save the scraps because, as you remember from the template, subsequent boards get very much smaller very quickly. So I've got a lot of stock over here. We're going to start squaring up one end and then cutting them to width. Template 2 has some of the same requirements. I have a minimum height. This one's a narrower board. It's just, that's kind of how it worked out. So I've made my mark right here on my tape and I'm good. I've also placed my stop in the right place. It's the same thing. We're just going to do it all over again with a new template. Again, save your scraps because that template number 3, that's a mighty small board. All right, you can see the stack's getting larger, and I've got an extra one in there as well. But now it's time for template 3, and this one is small. No need to use the fence here. I've got a stop set up. Same story, but we're going to be running around. I still want to keep the same height, the minimum height on this, although I've got a lot more to play with here. There's no reason to borrow trouble. So we're going to be going back and forth to our diminishing wood pile and start pulling bits and pieces. But I want to point out, that's a piece of scrap, and it's perfectly long enough, so we're going to end up using a lot of this. Every piece of scrap that you can use and make useful is one that you don't have to pay for in the future. I've started the process of assembly, and this is my template here. I have my outlines, as you can see, on the table. Now, this is going to take a lot longer than the others. I could get a whole drawer side in place with 2 clamps. With this one here, I'm looking at 3 clamps. That may not seem like a big deal, except I only have 18 of these parallel clamps, and that can be a bit of a problem. And I have only so many F clamps as well. Believe it or not, I have run out of clamps. Now, there is one other thing that I will point out here, and this is something that I had not even thought about remotely, and it'll become apparent here in just a second. I'm going to take this one and get him good and tight, because that's the first. Get that. All right, one more twist. All right, that's good and tight because it's beating up on top. This guy right here is the third one. He's going to go like that. Is that a problem? Well, yeah, it kind of is because I need a long clamp to get there. But the bigger problem is this. If these clamps aren't of the uniform make, you can't use them. This bar is what it rests on here unless you put the other ones in place. And I think we may be able to do that. But if you're going to rest it like that, then you're forced to use all 3 the same. If you turn it over, that's a little different. A lot of people turn these things over, and on something like this, I might, but if I'm going to the trouble of getting these in place, I'm not too sure it's necessary. So I'm going to let this sit for a minute and think about this, because I can't get that in there at all. So let me get a bigger clamp so I can get this leveled out. Well, what you see before you is 18 panels, and they are all glued up and they are curing as we speak. Now, this happened in 2 stages because I've only got 18 clamps. I had to take half of them and glue them up with 2 clamps on each panel, get those set, and then finally I'm down to just 1 clamp per panel. And I can do that because it's only about a 6 to 8 inch piece of material, and I don't need 2 clamps for that. So I've got to let these cure, but in the meantime, we're going to go over to the table saw and cut out a template that we're going to use to actually mill these all to shape. So let's go over to the table saw and let me show you what I got in mind. I've got a piece of scrap stock here that I'm going to use for my template. I pulled it from the back room, and this is actually a piece from my rolling storage video. You might watch that one. It's a good one. I have taken the time to make sure I've got a square corner, and that's important because we're going to cut the length of the drawer on the fence, turn it, and then cut the height of the drawer on the fence. And if you're not square here, that's just not going to work. Now, we're not going to have any extra on one side or the other. We're going to make this exact same size as the panel we want to match. And we're going to be able to do a lot of this on the table saw because we're going to be using what's called an L fence. And you'll see more about that as we go forward. And the curved section right here, we will pattern match first on the bandsaw, and then we'll follow up and clean it up with a router. But first things first, let's get ourselves cut to square, and we'll go from there.
I usually freehand my curves. I do a couple of them until I get one I like, but the real problem is how to transfer it. If I had carbon paper, I might use that. And that's a funny thing right there. How many people of you know what carbon paper is? If you know, you've just dated yourself. It's the same method my kindergarten teacher told me. We'll take that crayon and start marking on the back side of the page. We'll get enough crayon to cover the full length of the curve on the other side. We'll get our board in place, and then we'll start tracing that line. And magically enough, I think you know what's going to happen. It's going to appear on the other side. It's not very dark, but it's there. We'll go ahead and reinforce that line with a pencil. Now the first couple of inches of the approach are straight, and we'll use the fence to help us with that. After that, we'll go ahead and freehand the rest. I've got 2 lines here that define the top and the bottom of the dado that will hold the drawer bottom. The holes that I'm drilling are to accommodate screws. Those screws will attach the template to the base stock. This will hold the piece securely to the template, and you'll never see the holes because the dado will hide them.
We're out of the clamps, and my blanks look really, really good. Now, this template that we made a little earlier, it's going to fit just like this. And we have holes in the bottom groove, the bottom dado, where the drawer bottom goes. And we'll put 2 more over here where the dados go. Those won't be seen. I'm using pocket hole screws, and those are at 1 1/4. So I'll probably put a washer underneath them to make sure that they don't go through the bottom. The whole attitude is we don't see any holes from the outside. It also means that we need to start paying attention what left and right is on these drawers. That's a quick and easy mistake to make. So we've got our template attached to this. How are we going to get the scrap off? Well, this edge over here, we will first cut the groove, the curved edge, on a bandsaw and then clean it up on a router. That's pretty self-explanatory. And it takes time. And I'm trying to speed this process up a little bit. This edge over here, we'll also cut the majority off on the bandsaw. But we're going to clean up the edge on these straight sides with what's called an L fence. Now, what is that? If you've watched the spalted pecan dresser, you know what an L fence is. It's an excellent way to pattern match on a table saw. So what we do is we take a piece of wood right here and we secure it to our table saw fence, much like you would a sacrificial fence. But off this, we take and we put ourselves, we dado in another piece of wood Now we can adjust that such that the very edge is right at the edge of the blade and right at the height of our template. So when we push through, this edge rides against the L fence and we get a perfect cut. Now why do they call it an L fence? Well, probably the first ones were just an L. Mine is actually going to come up a little higher, and we're going to dado it in and make it very strong. And I might actually keep this one. The one I used for the spalted pecan dresser must have found its way into a burn pit or just didn't make the move. I can't find it, and I'm not going to look anymore for it. So we're going to get started on this. I've got a piece of pine on the jointer. We're going to get it milled up, squared up, put a dado in, and build ourselves an L fence. So let's go ahead and get started on that.
I've got to rip this thing down the middle, and I would rather have a straight edge than a factory edge, so a quick pass with a jointer solves that problem. I also want to get rid of the rough edges. My perimeters are defined. Let's get things flat and square. The faces are paralleled on the planer, and yes, I did fix the spiral head. I'm going to cut the dado with a standard blade and just kind of sneak up on it, but I need about half the board depth to start with. I'm going to give myself about an inch height on this, and I'm going to use a standard blade. I did not plane these things down to a standard thickness, so we're going to sneak up on this until the dado fits snugly. And that's okay because it's only one dado. This is not a production joint. Finally, I would remind you to move the fence in the right direction. It's not always intuitive, but if you move it the wrong direction, that inch could shrink down to a ½ inch, and then you will not have enough room. Assembly is simple, but maybe a little overboard. I do countersink my screws, I pre-drill everything, and I do use glue here. This thing is going to be stout as hell, but it needs to stay square, and I think it will.
Well, as you can see, I've got the first two done, and these were the experiments to see how fast this process goes. And quite frankly, it does not disappoint. It goes very quickly and is extremely accurate. As a matter of fact, it will take me 4 times longer to film this as it does to actually produce these pieces. Let me move these aside and we'll get started with these over here.
It is as simple as putting the template on the inside of our stock and screwing it in place. The screws do not go through the other side, so there's never a hole to see. We will rough cut all the edges on the bandsaw. Next, all the straight edges are cleaned up with the L fence on the table saw. Finally, the curve is cleaned up with the patterning bit on the router table. And that is one beastly bit.
As you can see, that's a pretty good job. So let's take this and flip him over.
Well, now you've seen the procedure, and I think you understand where I was going. The results speak for themselves.
I had to stack them up. They just look so good. I love seeing that curve right there and having it so uniform. Nothing does that quite like a template. And you know, that's what you think you're looking at, but it's not. What you're really looking at is this edge right here and these edges over there. And that is because they're uniform as well. That template allowed me to cut the whole piece. Now, yes, this was done on a router table, but the rest of them were done on the table saw using an L fence, and that's a technique that you really need to master. It will broaden your horizons. I've been putting curves in wood for years, but that L fence, I learned that about 5 years ago. That was new for me, but I'll tell you what, it's been around for eons. You need to master that technique. Your world will get bigger. Now where are we? We started with rough cut timbers, and we milled them to first dimension, and now we're at second dimension, and we've got panels cut up, everything's glued up. Our front and backs, they need to be dimensioned to width and depth, and that needs to happen. Everything needs to come down in thickness. We're a little bit shy of 5/8. We'll do that on the drum sander. I don't think I'm gonna put you through that. Let's just say it's boring. And it's boring for me too, but it's gotta be done. That's all part of it. But what are we going to be doing? we're going to be looking at joinery, and we're going to get the dovetailing jig back out again, and we've got to put stop dados in for the bottoms and cut those bottoms. So that's going to be a busy time, and I hope to see you there in Roby's workshop.